because that anxious person is used to the inconsistency, the avoidant person provides that abandonment feeling, that level of inconsistency.
Okay.
And the avoidant person tends to like the anxious person because they don't know how to experience their feelings. They don't know, they can't express the same level of emotion that the anxious person can. But these two people have completely different coping mechanisms with how they handle their emotions.
Right.
Completely different needs.
Okay.
Right. But they often subconsciously fall in love, and it causes almost every toxic relationship you will ever hear about.
Huh. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Introspect Club, a club where you can learn a lot about yourself through conversations with other people. My name is Damisse, and I'll be your host. Today we have a very special guest and a very good topic that we have for the week. We're going to be talking about how people connect from a very scientific / psychological level. But then we can also think about it from a very pragmatic sense, because in a lot of ways, people connect in certain ways that they're not even familiar with. A lot of it is stemming from things that they experience, whether it's from childhood or actively in their lives. So we have a guest that is very, very fluent in this conversation, really in this language, to say the least. So without further ado, I want to introduce one of my very favorite people in life, Flora, the relationship coach. How you doing, Flora?
Dad, you're one of my favorite people too.
What are you talking about? I don't know. I'm insecure about it. I don't know. Am I your favorite person?
Well, we can break that down.
All right, great. Fair enough. Listen, give everybody a quick introduction to yourself so they get to know who you are. I know who you are, but I think other people should as well.
Thank you. My name is Flora Ong. I'm the founder of Redo Love. I'm a dating and relationship coach. I focus on attachment styles as a way to help people understand their subconscious drives. And as we know by now, our subconscious basically runs about like 90 to 95% of every action and decision that we make. So if you're not really familiar with your subconscious, you don't really know why you're making certain decisions or what's driving you towards something, or especially and specifically in love relationships.
Interesting. So you mentioned attachment styles, right? I've seen clips of you all over the internet talking about attachment styles. I would almost imagine you invented them. Okay. So
I definitely experienced them deeply.
I can sense it, because like you're all over TikTok, you're all over IG, you're all over the internet, just expressing very openly, especially personally, how like some of those things affected you. So give me an idea, as well as everybody else, like break down like the attachment styles, what they are, what they really mean, and we can dig deeper into them after.
Okay, so your attachment style is the way that you learn to relate to people on a subconscious level before the age of 3.
Okay.
And so the way that you attach to your caretakers is the way that you will attach to in your adult life. It very much mirrors your love relationship, because your parental relationships are the most similar to your love relationships in life, right?
Okay.
And And so if you were raised with appropriate emotional attunement, and what does emotional attunement means? It means that your parents allowed you to have your emotions, they supported your emotions, they encouraged your emotions, and they helped you to repair your emotions.
Right.
They'd get down like on your level and look you in the eye. If you were happy, if you were upset, they would celebrate with you. They would appropriately deal with your emotions. And most importantly, they would help you to, like I said already, to repair your emotions, right? So if you were raised in that way, then you would have a secure attachment style.
Okay. So that's one of them.
That's one of them. If, do you want me to do the adult version too right now? Maybe I should say that.
There's an adult version? What does he mean?
Well, the adult version, the adult securely attached person is somebody who's comfortable with their feelings, comfortable expressing their emotions, comfortable within conflict because they know that conflict leads to resolution, right? And they're not necessarily stimulated by conflict, right?
Okay.
They just kind of know, well, okay, we have to have a conversation. We got to figure stuff out.
Yeah.
So if you had inconsistent emotional attunement when you were young, you would have an anxious attachment style. And what that looks like is sometimes your parents were available and they were great and they were loving and they were kind and they did all the things, but a lot of times for whatever reason they weren't available. Maybe you had like 7 brothers and sisters and mom just didn't have time. Or in my case, my primary attachment style is anxious. My parents were immigrants, so I was like with my grandparents and daycare and wherever they could leave me because they were always working. And that would cause an anxious attachment style because what happens in that situation is because you're a baby, you have no sense of time. Mom says, I'm coming back at 7:00. That means nothing to, a baby. And you're constantly living in a state of abandonment where your caretaker has just left you and you don't know if they are ever coming back. And so you develop this feeling of desperation and also this hypervigilance around like noticing when somebody's going to leave. And that carries into adulthood, into love relationships where the love is associated with abandonment and you don't even recognize love without abandonment. And you're always afraid of abandonment.
You're afraid of it, but you're also associating love with it.
Yes.
Ugh.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Glad you picked up on that nuance.
Yeah.
But we can talk more about how that shows up later. If your parents were mostly neglectful with your emotional attunement, which means that they could have been there, they could have been like sitting next to you the whole time, but they were dismissive. They shut down your emotions. They weren't interested because they were busy themselves and doing their own thing. You would end up with an avoidant attachment style. Yeah. And what happens is the child, because their emotions aren't like ever noticed or cared for or encouraged, they basically, like before the age of 3, they shut down their emotional center. They completely and totally like close off and shut down. They stop looking to people to solve anything for them. They get kind of a lot more into their toys, a lot more into games later on, a lot more into passions and hobbies. And they have a really hard time with emotion as adults, right? Because they don't know how to experience emotion in a healthy way. Yeah. And when they begin to experience emotion, they typically push away.
Now, is what they're doing just mirroring what their parents did to them, or are they just mirroring what they think is the proper response to what was done to them?
They developed a coping mechanism as children. And I suppose, part of it is mirroring how they were treated, right? Because that's all they know. But in order to receive love from their parents and to be, as part of that family properly, and happily, they weren't allowed to have emotions. So they grew up not really experiencing their emotions properly.
Okay.
And so in adulthood, they just
they didn't experience having to like have the dialogue, having the exchange. So therefore, they're like, they know how to keep it within. And sharing it is like a foreign exchange, for lack of a better word, to them.
Yes. Yes. And they do feel it deeply on the inside, sometimes not so deeply on the inside, but they don't express it as much because it wasn't healthy to express it in their home.
Wow. Okay. So go ahead.
Huh?
No, go ahead.
That's the avoidant, and that is in adulthood. I mean, let's guess, right? Like this person doesn't really get deeply into relationships, or they could be very cool in relationship and wonderful until emotions get involved. And when emotions get involved, that's when they get very uncomfortable and start pushing away.
And they probably don't text you that much.
And they probably don't text you, right? Avoidants need a lot of space, like a lot of space, enjoy their alone time, while the anxious person is the complete opposite and, wants attention and wants validation and reassurance a lot. There's one more attachment style, which is the fearful avoidant attachment style. And that is somebody who more than likely, and not always, but more than likely experienced some serious abuse in childhood. So sexual, mental, emotional, physical abuse, where what happened was that they love their parents because you don't really have a choice, right? When you're a baby, this is the love relationship that your life is modeled on.
It's your life source, the only life source you knew. Right.
And at the same time, you're afraid of it. So they grow up being people that really want relationship, really are intensely wanted, but are also extremely afraid of it.
Okay. That sounds like a very sporadic person.
Very hot and cold. They typically get that, that moniker, hot and cold. They can be, all in. And then the second their partner is like, okay, great, now I want to be in too, they're like, no, let's not get crazy. And they're very, very mistrusting. They don't trust people on the whole and in general, let alone their partner. They're always assuming their partner is doing something.
I experienced that. And I remember one of my earlier relationships when I was in college, I dated this woman who was constantly on me, like for attention, for validation and so on and so forth. And even though I was like extremely loyal to her, right? And I spent time with her while I was like working and going to college. I made time for her, and there were times where like I would go straight to her from school or from work, and but she was just never satisfied with that. And then I didn't necessarily fail to make the association, but I knew that she was abandoned as a child. Like she was like an orphan. Her mom was on drugs. She never met her dad. All kinds of stuff, right? And I had a lot of love for her, but at the same time, there was a lot of like mistrusting or like, accusations and so on and so forth. And it took me until my adulthood to kind of make that link. Like I knew there was something to that when I was younger, but I didn't know to what degree the impact was. And if I had known, I probably wouldn't even gotten involved with that person. Like no shame towards them, but it's just like I had to be aware of what I had the capacity for back then, and I didn't. So
yeah, I mean, first of all, this is the relation of attachment styles and attachment theory to adult love relationships is kind of a new concept.
Yeah.
I always recommend the book Attached by Amir Levine. I think you've read it, right?
Yep. I read that.
And so that was kind of the first book that put the pieces together from attachment theory is like tried and true psychological, like almost fact at this point, right? They've redone the same test over and over and over hundreds of times. So it's a very like tried and true thing. But the relation to adult attachment styles is reasonably new.
So how does that impact you per se, right? You have all this knowledge. You said you grew up anxious, right? That's what you told me, right? Yeah. But like, you are also in the love space, right? You coach people, you meet people, you know, often match them up in instances, right? But like, what do you see as someone who's very aware of this information? How does it affect you when you're interacting with other people, whether you're dating them or you're seeing other people date other people or you're coaching them? How do you move through the world knowing this information?
Well, what I'm highly aware of is how subconscious all of this stuff is. Because if you think about it, the reason I keep saying it happened so young and it happened before the age of 3 is because it's not something you remember. And it's, even if you know, like, I prefer a lot of validation and reassurance, even if you know those things, the manifestation of how it happens in relationship is still very subconscious.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
And your subconscious is the thing that's constantly driving you and constantly making decisions for you. Yeah. So what happens is you'll justify your behavior in your cognitive brain, right? In your left brain, where that makes all your cognitive decisions, all your conscious thought is there, right? But you're still doing stuff from the subconscious. So for example, let's say, I'll use myself, an old me as an example, right? Like where I haven't heard from somebody in a day and I'm like, well, I want to talk to them. And why haven't I heard from them?
I'm sorry, Flora. I meant to text you back. I was busy.
And so I start to make all these stories up in my head about like, well, maybe something's wrong. And maybe, you know, I should get in touch with him because, you know, clearly like I need to speak to him. And I start getting nervous and the anxiety starts kicking in, but maybe I should wait. And you start driving yourself nuts. You start ruminating over these thoughts and start trying to make sense of it until you send the text or make the call or do whatever. But
what's the craziest thing that you regret doing in response to someone that was not responding to you fast enough as an anxious person?
Oh, please. What did I do? I was in this very toxic relationship, and we can talk about the anxious avoidant trap here, if you want, but I'll tell you about that. And then I'll tell you how that, like what the subconscious, part of it is. First of all, it took us 6 months to meet, right? So I was texting with this guy. So that's regret number 1. Okay.
Did he live in Bangladesh? Like, what are we talking about?
No, he lived 20 minutes away. He was avoidant. He was not willing really to meet.
6 months and he lives 20 minutes
away. Yeah. And okay, so I had just gotten divorced.
He was married. That's what he was.
He wasn't.
Okay.
I had just gotten divorced. Let me just lay the groundwork here, okay? I had no idea about attachment styles. I had no idea what any of this was. I was running completely. First of all, I wasn't in a good place. I just got divorced. But second of all, I was running completely and totally on emotion and completely and totally on anxious attachment, right? I see that now. Okay. And so it took us 6 months to meet. We finally meet. We're like, by the time we meet, we're like kind of in love already. But because he was avoidant,
kind of in love already. I
don't want to take up too much time with like the story, but you know how it is when you're texting with somebody, when you're on calls with somebody before you meet them, you're already establishing what you feel like is a relationship, but it's not a real relationship because you haven't actually met yet.
Got it. You're developing an idea of the person before you actually know the person. And you're always going to go to the positive to like have something to attach to. Got it.
Exactly. And so we meet, and we had this very toxic relationship because he was avoidant and I was anxious, and we would have a great time together. We would like play boyfriend, girlfriend. We'd like hang out, and then he would leave, and he would not reach out to me for like weeks. And even if I was reaching out to him like 2 weeks at a time, he needed 2 solid weeks in between seeing me because he was highly avoidant, and it made him very uncomfortable to be overly intimate. He needed to go slow. He needed time. He needed to pace the whole situation, because when I say that attachment styles are subconscious, what I'm also saying is they're in your nervous system, right? Okay. So for him, his nervous system couldn't handle that much intimacy. It couldn't handle that much emotional involvement. Yeah. And so he solidly needed 2 weeks between us seeing each other.
That's what he said. And like he said, I need 2 weeks, or that's just his actions.
That's how it ended up happening.
So you noticed the pattern of like, he won't miss me until 2 weeks has gone by.
Yeah.
But then what would you...
Plans. He would leave and he'd be like, yeah, I'll see you like in 2 days. And then I'd be like, oh, okay, great. And then 2 days would come, and either he'd cancel or he wouldn't cancel, or he'd call or he wouldn't call. I am sobbing like in the background, like, what's going on? Why hasn't he called me? Calling him, texting him. He's blocking me. Okay. He blocks me because I'm like calling 100 times over.
Oh, you're calling that often?
I'm texting. I'm like, what the what's going on?
And then he blocks you.
He blocks me. I then get a internet phone number.
No, you did not.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yo, you are vicious. Okay, you're like, oh no, you're gonna hear from me.
And I'm texting him from this other phone number, to like find him and catch him in whatever was going on. But this went on, I obviously that wasn't the exact course of events, but that this was like a 1.5 to 2 year relationship where this kept going back and forth like this, and we would break up and then we would get back together. And for me, as an anxious person, every 2 weeks I was experiencing a full breakup, and then didn't have the self-worth to create a boundary and stick to it, right? And I would get back together with him, even though I'd be like, and I'm never speaking to you again. How could you do that to me?
But in some ways that must have been like exciting for you, whether it's for good or bad. Like there had to have been some type of thing that attracted you to something that was so inconsistent.
There you go. I mean, the anxious person associates love with inconsistency and associates love with abandonment. Okay. So when somebody is inconsistent towards an anxious person and, shows a little bit of abandonment, like doesn't call right away or doesn't, isn't like right there, that triggers the anxious attachment style and says, oh, this is what love is. I have to hold on to this, right? And subconsciously, you're just like that crying baby waiting for like mom to come back and get you.
Right.
And that is your association of love.
So, I remember the very same woman I mentioned that I was dating in college that was like, she grew up in a very toxic environment. I remember there were times like we would get into arguments like constant, and we would get into arguments, and her response to like some of these arguments, she'll out of spite, she'll change her, because back then, I don't know if blocking, I'm showing my age right now. I don't know if blocking was like that abundant, but she would change her number. Like literally just give up her number, the number that she's had for years. She would change her number so I don't reach out to her, which to me, I was just like, whatever, right? She changed her number and then a day later text me from the new number. right? That happened at least 3 times in our relationship, right? And I'm like, you've had 3 numbers since we started dating, like, and we only dated for like a year, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, what? I mean, obviously, I contributed to why we're not together anymore, but at the same time, like, that, what you're talking about is very reminiscent of somebody that does that. That's
the anxious side of the fearful avoidant, because for the fearful avoidant one, which is the one that is hot and cold, what they do is they vacillate between anxious and avoidant behaviors. So they have both sides of, you know. Yeah. So what
about now, right? So you know all this stuff, and in the past you did X, Y, and Z. You over texted to the point where you got blocked. You know what I mean? Like
only an avoidant.
Like restraining.
I want to. That's that's the thing. And what happens a lot of times, and I do think this is important. The anxious avoidant loop is that because that anxious person is used to the inconsistency, the avoidant person provides that abandonment feeling, that level of inconsistency.
Okay.
And the avoidant person tends to like the anxious person because they don't know how to experience their feelings. They don't know, they can't express the same level of emotion that the anxious person can. And they're, you know, they fall for that. They're like, wow, look at this person who has, you know, this capacity that I don't have that at all, but it's overwhelming for them and they can't handle too much of it. So they need space and time in between, right? But these 2 people have completely different coping mechanisms with how they handle their emotions.
Right.
Completely different needs.
Okay.
Right. But they often subconsciously fall in love, and it causes almost every toxic relationship you will ever hear about.
Huh. I wonder if like people were more aware of their attachment styles, if they actually would be more functional in their relationships, or if it's just like something that only can be like remedied through actual work, like acknowledgement is not enough.
It's both, right? I mean, you have to have some level of both, because you could know that you're
an alcoholic.
Anxious.
An alcoholic.
Yeah.
This is
what are you drinking right now?
This is water. It's not vodka. Okay, it's water. I like to hydrate. All right, I'm not that drunk.
You want to talk about it?
That's we're gonna save it for Patreon.
But where was I? You need to have self-awareness first, and you need to not only have self-awareness, but self-accountability.
Right.
You need to be able to say, shit. A lot of times you'll do the thing, whatever your attachment style is, like you'll not respond to the text, and you know you're supposed to respond to the text, or you'll, as an anxious person, you'll, you know, freak out because you didn't hear from somebody, like, you know, in the appropriate time for you. And a lot of times you realize it after the fact. You're like, oh, I did that thing, and I did that thing because I was feeling anxious, and there was really no reason for me to feel anxious, but, you know, I reacted anyway to my emotions. And if you can take accountability for it, even afterwards, you're already like steps in the right direction, right? Yeah, but being self-aware, sometimes it only gives you kind of like a surface level of being able to change the behavior. You know, it's really until you deal with the childhood trauma that got you there. That's where you really can see some real change.
Did you already assess what attachment style I have? Or were you still juggling? I know. I'm just trying to see if you remember what it is.
What do you mean if I remember?
If you remember, I don't know.
In my opinion, and again, it's not something that is always that obvious, right?
Okay.
Because you really don't know somebody's attachment style until they're properly triggered, right?
Okay.
But just given a couple of things you've told me, I would say you lean avoidant. I don't know that you're completely avoidant, but I would say you lean in the direction.
What do you mean I'm completely avoidant? What does that mean?
I said, I don't know that you're completely avoidant.
Okay. So
I said, you definitely lean avoidant, I would say.
Why do you say I lean avoidant?
I mean, through different conversations we've had, one thing you've told me that for me is like one of the bigger things is that when you break up with somebody, you never speak to them again.
I'm trying to figure out like if that's avoidant or just efficient. Like,
well, I mean, you know, a secure person couldn't. I mean, look, I think that in most breakups, it's really good to have a break and not speak to the person. That,
okay,
you know, because it's kind of hard, right? Like that can be hard to navigate too. Okay. But if you have the capacity to completely shut down that whole experience and never need to talk to the other person again, that leans into avoidance.
You know, I'm glad you brought that up because when I'm thinking about it, right, I can see why someone would, like, I'm going to use the word misplace that behavior towards avoidant, because the question needs to be asked why I did that or why I do that, right? And it's not because like I don't want to deal with the emotional back and forth, or I don't want to, you know, I don't know how to cope, right? It's not, it's nothing like that, right? There's two reasons why if I break up with somebody, I never speak to them again. Okay. Reason number one is that 99% of all my relationships, I'm the one who broke up with the person. Right. No. And then I'm sure, hey, hold on. Let's slow it down. All right. And there's a reason for that, right? I've always been very like assertive in how I move through life, right? So if I'm in a relationship with somebody, I've always tried to be very conscious of the things that I want, but where I failed is what I wanted or what I want in a relationship. Oftentimes I manifested in my own head through the person that might not have even had the capacity for the things that I wanted. Right. And while being in the relationship with them, and I discovered that, okay, everything that I imagined about the person, who they were, I thought they were supposed to be for me. I realized how false it was. And that's a fault on my part. But when I came to that realization, the idea of who that person was just an idea. So when I separated, there wasn't somebody that I could necessarily go back and connect to for any particular reason in the future. Because in my mind, the person I thought they were in my head doesn't even exist. So what am I really returning to? Right. That was an issue that I was dealing with. And I think I've resolved in multiple ways. Right. The second reason is I've witnessed a lot of people have a lot of like lingering baggage coming into new relationships, partly because of exes or, you know, other types of like trauma they've experienced in other relationships that they should have let go, you know, a long time ago. And I went the other extreme where I said, you know what, I'm going to give my new partner the gift of a clear runway. Right. So when I meet somebody new, they don't have to worry if my ex is in my DMs or if my ex is still trying to knock on my door. Cause I've had instances like that when, you know, well, the very same, you know, I've had exes show up in my house with lingerie, right? I've had that happen, right? I've had exes. There was one time I was, what happened? I used to live in this luxury building in Brooklyn, and I was out with somebody I was dating, and we were out for a drive heading towards, I think we were going to the beach or something like that. And we were driving, and then I get a call because in the building, the reason why I mentioned the luxury building is when you push a number for my apartment unit, it goes to my cell phone. Right. So I'm in the car and it rings through my car audio, and I have my lady to my right. And then I just pick up because I didn't know who it was, who's at my door. So I'm thinking it's packages or something like that. And sure enough, it's my ex. Right. And I'm like, hello? And then they're like, oh, hey, are you around? And mind you, my lady's to my right. I'm like, and she's thinking, who's this woman, right? And I'm just like,
hearing the whole conversation.
She's hearing the whole conversation. But I knew I had nothing to hide, so I was playing it anyway. But she was like, oh, I was in the neighborhood. I figured I'd stop by and, maybe we could talk and this. And I was just like, and I had to be very clear. I'm with somebody else right now. Right. We are no longer together. And she was like, oh, and then the lady I was with was just like, right. But that was just a freak accident because the person obviously knew she didn't live that far from me and she was in the neighborhood and so on and so forth. But in normal circumstances, a lot of people open the door a lot more. So those are the two reasons why I don't communicate with my exes.
That doesn't make you any less avoidant.
Hey. Let me live. Okay.
You see, do you remember what I said in the beginning where we take our emotions and we make story out of them and we justify why we do the things we do? Okay. That is what you just did. I mean, essentially. And I'm not saying that you not speaking to your exes necessarily makes you avoidant, but what I am saying is there is other versions of reality where you can have the uncomfortable conversations with somebody that comes along with a breakup, right? And you can still have other relationships and not completely discard what, the year you just spent with somebody by never speaking to them again, It's a possibility.
I don't want to deal with my emotions. I don't want to do it.
The other thing I was going to say is that avoidants soothe on their own, right?
Okay.
They deal with emotional issues on their own. They don't seek out advice. I'm not saying that, not that they don't seek out advice, but they don't necessarily seek out being calmed by another human,
I definitely don't seek out to be calmed by other people, but like I did take the attachment assessment. Now I don't know how accurate it is, but it put me in the secure category. Right now, to your point, right? Attachment styles are a spectrum, right? And a quadrant. So I was labeled as secure, right? But like to your point, like there's like a dash of avoidance, just a little Salt Bay dash of avoidant, right? So you are accurate in that sense, but the large majority of how I move is in a secure manner, according to the test. Maybe I took it wrong.
And also it's important to know that attachment styles, you can move along the spectrum throughout life. It can change. You can move towards security. You can move away from security depending on what's going on in your life and the partner that you have.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, you could be secure and be in a relationship with somebody who's highly avoidant and become anxious as a result of that, because avoidance breeds anxiety and anxiety breeds avoidance, right? So the same if you're secure and you're in a relationship with somebody who's highly anxious, you can become avoidant, right? Because naturally you're going to be like, all right, chill. Well, you don't need to talk this much, or we don't need to like hang out this much or whatever.
To your point, one thing that I did note, well, I've always known about myself, right? I'm sipping a truth serum here. All right. I did know that like, if I'm in a relationship and I get in like an argument or disagreement that rubbed me the wrong way, right? My natural inclination is she's not going to hear from me for a while. Right? Not like I'm like, I don't know what it is. It's more so like, I don't want to say it like this. It's going to sound egotistical, right? Like a part of me is kind of like, I'm not going to like award you with my presence after doing or saying something like that.
I mean, avoidants are known to have narcissistic tendencies.
Hey, listen, hey. Why am I dropping the bomb on myself?
Yeah, no, I mean, it makes sense because, again, like if you're leaning towards avoidant, you need space to kind of figure, I mean, you need space, yeah, to deal with it on your own, because that's what avoidants do. Avoidants deal with things on their own, and anxious people need to resolve immediately because they're anxious and they're like worried that the relationship's going to end. They don't know how to give things time. They don't know how to give things space.
Yeah.
And they, they need immediate resolution, and what the worst thing that happens is avoidance. Okay. If you know you're anxious and if you know you're avoidant, you can speak to these things, right? Like if you're in a relationship, you can speak to this. You can say, look, I'm the type of person, like it'll freak me out if you go cold on me for a week. Please don't do that. The avoidant person to be like, well, I do that. So I'm going to let you know that I'm going to take a week, and take some time.
I've said that to my partners. Like once I've gotten real conscious of how I am, like sometimes they'll ask me, they're like, how are you like in an argument or when you're like angry, like, do you get really angry? Do you have anger issues? Like people will ask me that question. I welcome the question. And my response is like, usually, when I'm angry, if I remove myself from a particular situation. I'm not the type to be like, trying to go toe to toe with you and go into this back and forth bickering match. Like even sometimes in public, like when people are just like talking like smack and just doing all kinds of nonsense, like if I have to like physically fight somebody, it's because I was physically threatened. Right. But if it's like, but if it's just like somebody's just yapping, I'm just like, yo, I'm not even gonna deal with you. Like, this is stupid, right? That's how I am. And that's how I am outside relationships, and that's how I am in relationships, because I don't like to like, add toxicity into my headspace, because how I move through the world will be, dislodged if I bring that into my. So I'm very protective of my headspace.
Yeah. Yeah, avoidants typically are conflict averse.
God,
I'm just. You
don't know me, woman.
I'm just saying. So it makes a lot of sense, but
oh god, I hate proving you right when I'm trying to prove you wrong. It's like, yeah, that's avoidant. Damn it.
But what I wanted to say before was that
I'm really annoyed right now. I'm just being honest, because it's like I'm thinking I'm speaking very like highly of myself, and I'm thinking I'm like being very like, I proved my point, and you're like, yeah, you just proved my point. I was like,
yeah, I mean, I've been saying this the whole time. You're like, every time you're like, man, I'm not avoidant. You're like, but
in one conversation, you turned me into a baby. Jesus. Anyway,
wouldn't be the first time.
Hey. Dude, we're gonna cut that out. Well, so give me an example of like a person you were coaching that exhibited an extreme version of some of these attachment styles, and show me or tell me how that affected them or how they were affected overall.
Well, I had a guy recently that was highly, highly avoidant, and he was around 45, 46, and nice, like amazing guy, super interesting, did, a lot of really interesting things in life, like a very adventurous guy, was military related, did a lot of military related stuff, did a lot of, running and marathoning and, all the sports stuff, and highly like accomplished in his own, right. And which is very typical of avoidance, by the way, right? Because again, they lean into things, they lean into passions, they lean into, and when we initially spoke, again, seemed like super charming, super nice, and, all the things. And then when we started working together, he had a really, really negative association of women and relationships in general.
A lot of guys do. A lot of guys nowadays do. Yeah.
And he didn't he didn't realize how he was talking a lot of the time, like he would say things like, there are no women who like sports. which is the most ridiculous thing in the world to say, right? Because there are plenty of women that like sports, but he had, because of his avoidance and because of the negative experiences he ended up having with a lot of anxious women, right? Because again, that's like, you fall polarity. A lot of times when you're avoidant, you fall into trap with the anxious and and you get this very negative association. So he, his whole mindset around women, around relationship, was that all relationships end in divorce or misery. All women, don't like sports and don't like the things that I like and don't like the adventure stuff. Like, I jump out of planes. I want somebody who's going to jump out of a plane with me. And I can't find that doesn't exist,
That's very specific.
Well, I'm just saying, like, he was highly adventurous, right?
Okay.
What is that? What is that? When you are adrenaline junkie. He was an adrenaline junkie. That's what I'm trying to say. So, and he's like, I can never find a woman like that. And it was the best thing that happened was this was in a group, right? And there was another guy in the group, and the other guy, they had a very similar background, like military wise, right? These two guys, and totally from opposite sides of the country, didn't know each other, just kind of came together in my group. And over the course of the group, this second guy revealed that his girlfriend that he was in relationship with and struggling with a little bit was all of the things that this other avoidant guy was saying was impossible. It could never happen. She was an adrenaline junkie. She was jumping out of planes with him. They were like, climbing mountains together and all the things, right? But again, because like I said, you make story and you make justifications out of the ways that you feel, right? But all insecure attachment styles do this, right? And so he made up these stories that there were no women that liked sports. There were no women that liked hiking. There were no women that were going to accept a guy that wants to split the bill, because he was the kind of guy that wants to split the bill. There are no women that, and they're just no, and it doesn't exist and it's not possible, and, all this stuff. And so, and he came to a lot of recognition throughout the program, throughout my group program, that really opens his eyes to how much his mindset was affecting his relationships or his ability to even have relationships.
You know what I will say, though? When people, self-included, right? When people have certain generalizations, right? Sometimes it's a reflection of two things or a combination of two things, right? One of two things or a combination of two things. Sometimes I think people have a unique experience based on where they grew up, the people that they were around, or the things that they allowed in their lives, right? And those experiences will shape their understanding of the rest of the world, because no one's going to have a chance to experience all of the world. Right? All you need is a certain sample size that you experience to have like a consensus of like, this is what I think will happen. Right? This is, the same reason why people have, prejudice or, racist beliefs or whatever, is because they have like a small sample in the wrong pocket, and then that became their normalcy. Right? And then I think what also happens, or what either can happen or what can also happen when that occurs first, is when that becomes like your introduction to whatever topic we're talking about, that also becomes what you see more often, what you pay attention to. You don't notice the alternative, even when it's in the same room. You only notice the stuff that you're very sensitive to. It's kind of like, you ever bought a car that you never had before, and then all of a sudden you see it all over the road?
Yeah, it's called, it's an actual biological thing. It's called your reticular activating system, right? So what you focus on, basically, your mind can only hold so much information, or your conscious mind can only hold so much information. So it filters, right? And it filters for the things that are affecting you, right? And it filters also for the things that you're influenced by, that you're looking for, that somebody even said to you, right? So if, like you just said, if you said, look for white Toyotas, I would suddenly see white Toyotas everywhere. Right? But, and so that you're 100% right. Like in his head, what he was doing to himself by repeating that constant, negative speak was making it real. Right.
Yeah, definitely. So I want to kind of dig into like some of the things you talked about and kind of like help some of the people that are listening to this podcast or who have listened to this podcast. I have loyal listeners who send me questions all the time. Look at you. I
love a good question.
So we're gonna dig into a couple questions. We're gonna start with something like super light, and then we'll get to something that might be a little heavier. Okay.
All right. Let's do it.
All right. I was looking forward to getting questions answered with you. Okay. Here's the first question from a guest. All right. And let's see how we can attack this one.
Are men more emotional than women?
Oh, no. I think to make such a broad generalization is kind of ridiculous.
Well, we're in the spirit of talking about generalizations. Here we go.
Yeah. I think that men societally, culturally have been forced to hide their emotions a lot more than women.
Okay.
And they've gotten better at doing that, just over the course of history. And so they lean more into their, into their anger or into their avoidance, rather than actually experiencing their emotions, I think overall as a cultural societal thing, but do I think I can't make such a broad generalization. That's,
I think before I personally could answer that question, we need to define what's considered emotional, right? Because there's this cliche that emotional is when like this outwardly expressed, almost uncontrollable sense of sensitivity that you could say, okay, this is an emotional person. This person's showing emotion, right? Because people fail to realize that emotions are expressed in different ways, right? And they're expressed in different frequencies and volumes. Okay, so when someone asks, are men more emotional than women, or are women more emotional than men? You have to first identify how are they showing the emotion. And then when you know how they show their emotion, you could say this person expresses their emotions more than that person, right? Because a woman might be, just as generalization, right? Based on everybody's assumed assumption of how women express emotion. A woman might be more emotional verbally, right? She might say things, she might express feelings, talk things out in a way that is like audible and you can recognize and say, this is emotional, right? A man, as cliche as it sounds, he might express it in a different way. Some men are verbal. Some men, can be very dynamic with how they express their emotions. But a man might express his emotions through certain actions that he does, right? Or a removal of actions, aka avoidance. And so, why am I raising my hands? I'm not avoiding. So there, if you can recognize that, right? And sometimes a man might do things, exhibit some anger, or he might not show emotion in large frequencies, but the buildup will express how much emotion he's had when it eventually boils over outwardly, right? So I think, I don't want to say there's an even amount. I think we need to spend more time understanding what emotion looks like from different people.
Yeah. I completely agree. That's why it's really hard to answer that question, because the experience of emotion and being emotional or acting emotional are two different things, right?
Right.
And so, an avoidant person, let's say, just for like the sake of, this conversation, can be deeply experiencing their emotions on their own, really going through it, but never outwardly expressing it.
Yeah.
Where an anxious person, it's like all emotion, it's all out there, it's crying, it's screaming, it's, fully expressed, right?
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean men or the avoidant person, let's say, is less emotional than the anxious person. Because, and I will say this is really, really important, is that we didn't go over how the attachment styles were discovered, but they were discovered when they tested 1.5-year-olds in an environment where the mom would come into a room and the mom would leave the room, right? And they discovered through this, through the child's reactions when mom would leave the room and come back, what each attachment style was, right? And so the avoidant child would not really care when mom left and not really care when mom came back. It would be like sitting, playing with toys, whatever, not really make a big, fuss. The anxious child would freak out when mom was leaving. When mom came back, the anxious child would also be tantruming and upset and even like trying to hurt mom a little bit, like punishing mom for leaving to begin with, kind of thing. And the fearful avoidant child was confused, right? And because again, they're kind of in between, right? So they're confused. But the point is that when they took the kids' vitals after this test, right, all 3 insecure attachment styles had increased vitals. They had increased heart rate. They were all anxious. So even the avoidant kid that seemingly, this is 1.5 years old now, okay? The avoidant kid that seemingly didn't care outwardly was still experiencing a lot of anxiety inwardly.
He's boiling. Or she's boiling. Yeah. And I believe that because sometimes even if someone's and this applies to men because that's the conversation that's kind of growing right now is men's ability to express themselves and so on and so forth. Men might not be as vocal, but the amount of emotion that they experience internally could be exponential to what you see outwardly. So I don't want people to get the misconception that because someone's not outwardly expressing stuff, that they're not emotional, that they're cold and so on and so forth. I remember my dad's wife recently passed away, right? Now, my dad has never really been an expressive person. And I've often was resentful of that as if he was just a cold person and so on and so forth. But then sometimes when people are triggered in certain ways, they express that emotion. So the most emotion I've ever seen my dad have was during his father's funeral and then his late wife's funeral, which was late last year. And when I saw him get on the in front of the church to kind of give a speech, and the things that he was expressing and how he was being super detailed and expressing some of the things that he valued in this person, I've never seen that side of him before. Right. And it took that moment, that very impactful circumstance to say this, I'm letting it out. And then it was hard watching. I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. But it was definitely something that mimicked the idea that when someone doesn't show emotion outwardly, it doesn't truly reflect what's happening on the inside. And then, as you said, if a child can get tested to see their vitals when they're experiencing some type of trauma, but they're not outwardly expressing it, they could still internally be feeling something. So that's why it's really important to talk things out and be very sensitive to other people, even if you might not immediately see their reaction to stuff.
Yeah. And I have to say that for me on a personal level, I really had to learn all of this in this part of my life, because I told you about that toxic relationship I had. As much as at the time I couldn't understand how he could act in this way to me, but And at the end of it, he loved me like to pieces, right? Like he still to this day, you know, like regards me as one of the greatest loves of his life. And for me being an anxious person, I couldn't comprehend that he didn't want to see me or that he didn't want to spend time with me as often as I did, right? And yeah, I now completely understand all of it, but at the time it was impossible for me to like rectify these things in my head. But now with this greater understanding, you know, I see that, and it still doesn't make, I mean, this bigger conversation still doesn't make it right for me the way that he loves, right? But I can now understand that he was only able to love me with the capacity, you know, that he had. And that was, you know, his full capacity. But he, you know, he did love me, and I couldn't understand that at the time, you know?
Well, the things we discover about ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Like how apparently I'm avoidant as all hell, even though the test results said I'm not. All right, let's get into that was the light question.
That was a light question.
Okay.
Great.
So you're like, that was a light thing. Like, okay, should I sign a waiver for this next one? All right. So here comes the next question from a loyal listener.
Hey, I have a question. What are good indicators, red flags that someone you're dating is a sociopath?
You aren't ready for that one? You said you wanted to answer some questions. You're welcome.
What am I, a psychiatrist? Here's what I can do, right? So I heard this question before, right? What I can there are 6 signs that someone is a sociopath that I saw online, and I'm gonna bring up each one by one, and then you tell me if you personally think it's valid and if you ever experienced someone that exhibited stuff like that. Is that cool? All right. First, I'm going to give one quick answer first. Okay. And it's hard because with the sociopaths essentially don't have any sense of empathy at all.
Okay.
Right. And that's really what it comes down to. So, yeah, I guess it's somebody that expresses no empathy, but you wouldn't know that until, you know, some time with the person.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm going to first describe what it says online. What is a sociopath, right? Sociopath is another term for antisocial personality disorder. It's a mental health condition where somebody persistently has difficulty engaging appropriately with social norms. That's how they describe it, at least in this definition. Okay. Now, here are 6 signs, right? Or behavioral indicators, right, of a sociopath, which is an antisocial personality disorder. The first one is manipulating other people's emotions. Have you ever experienced that?
Yeah, of course.
Give me an example of what that looks like.
I mean, I think that people do that again. I don't think that anybody I've dated is a sociopath, although I've called them that several times. You know, I can definitely use the word. But I think that people subconsciously manipulate each other again to, you know, there's a lot of gaslighting, for example, right? That happens. But I think people don't gaslight out of consciously doing it. They gaslight because it proves their version of the story. You know what I mean?
Like whether or not I'm avoidant or not.
Kind of. I mean,
damn, she just called me a sociopath on my show.
I mean, like I got into, I mean, this is a light, small thing, but like I got into this thing with this, you know, this guy that I dated, he was avoidant. And I didn't really realize it at the time, but, you know, I would say something like, why don't you call me? Or I want you to call me more or something like that. And he would just be like, well, why don't you call me? And, it seemed very light and easy. And, at one point I was like, oh, he's right. Why am I making this like a thing? Like I can just call him. But then, now I've called him 5 times. He hasn't called me once or whatever, and like engaged with me, let's say. And then he's still, when I bring it up, he's still like, yeah, but you could just call me. And I'm like, but at what point is there reciprocation? But I did fall into the trap of being a little bit gaslit by his just being like, yeah, well, why don't you just call me? And it's like, for a minute, I started to question my own interaction in the situation.
You know how this show's slogan is, you learn about yourself through conversations with other people. So I do this thing, right, where like my mom likes to call me all the time. She just like I have a great relationship with my mom, but she just calls me way too much. Right. You would say, because I'm avoidant. But like, she'll call me, Jeff, why don't you call mama? That's how she talks. Jeff, why don't you call mama? That's the Haitian Caribbean accent. And I always go, because you don't give me enough time to miss you. It's just like, I'm an old lady. Why don't you call me? If you called less, I'd miss you.
That's your mom, by the way, not your girlfriend.
But that's where it all started. Anyway, yeah, I found that interesting. Okay, so the second sign that someone that you're dating is potentially a sociopath. It says, well, this is extreme. Repeatedly breaking the law.
No, I've never been there. No? As far as I know, not with anybody that I dated. No, not with anybody I know, quite frankly.
So I have a story. Damn, I'm just slowly discovering I'm a sociopath.
So you're the one that's been arrested many times?
I've never been arrested. Yeah, that doesn't apply to me. I'm just being facetious. Okay, so that's one. It says showing no remorse.
Yeah, that was the empathy thing that I was talking about earlier, and I've definitely experienced that with some highly avoidant guys, that I dated. I mean, where crying. I'm upset. I'm like, whatever we're arguing about, and they're just like, yeah, whatever. Like completely stone-faced, like this isn't affecting me at all. Cry me a river kind of like, expression. And again, it doesn't mean like being that these people are not sociopaths and they are actually avoidant. It doesn't mean that they're not affected, right? But they don't show it on the outside, right? So they may have been emotionally affected, but the avoidant person, one thing we didn't say here is that they, in their nervous system, they go into freeze mode, right? When they're triggered. And so that's why they seem outwardly as though they are not affected and they're not emotional, because they do actually shut down their whole like their nervous system kind of shuts down. That's their subconscious reaction, right? And it completely shuts down. And so while as an anxious person, I'm in fight or flight, trying to fix, trying to, cry, scream, yell, whatever I can do to fix whatever the problem is, they're shut down. Completely and totally opposite. Again, like opposite coping mechanism, opposite needs, So
I have a story.
Do tell.
So remember when I said like sometimes like when I get into like if I get in an argument with somebody, my natural inclination to be like, I'm not dealing with this. I ain't got time for this. Right?
Yeah.
So I've been in scenarios where, because I can't fake emotion, right? I can't pretend to care about something that I don't care about, right? So, and this doesn't apply to all situations, right?
Of course.
But there are certain instances where if I'm with someone that's being super emotional, whether it's a significant other or just somebody that I know platonically, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not the person to be like, cry with them, right? I'm not the person to like be.
So you're saying I shouldn't come to you crying?
That's not what.
Broken my heart.
That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is my outward. How do I say this? My outward expression of caring doesn't look the same as what that person's expressing. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So like, I'm not like, cause there are some people like you cry, they cry. Right. The people are like that. Right. Don't get it twisted. I've gotten emotional with other people when it was something that I connected with because I felt it. Like I genuinely felt it, but it's not something where like someone's crying, I'm crying because I feel their pain. Like I'm just not like that. You know what I mean? So I've had people who come to me, because I'm like that, right? Because they can cry to me, they can cry on me, and they can feel like they have something that is like, you know, that they can have a conversation with that's not going to have an erratic response to what they're dealing with, right? Mm-hmm. But then there's also the people who are like, why don't you feel it too? And I'm like, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know what to tell you. So there's levels of that in me in particular scenarios, whereas there are other instances, and, you know, mainly when it comes to like family, when family is being, you know, emotional, like I feel it, like I could be miles away and I just feel it. You know what I mean? So anyway, I'm making jokes like I'm fully this person, but I have little dashes of, don't grin like that at me. I just know what you're thinking. Okay. Another set is repeatedly lying. I'm sure you've dealt with people who are like pathological liars, right? People that just lie.
No, in fact, I don't think, as far as I know, I've never been cheated on. I've never been lied to. I've been avoided, right? But I haven't, as far as I know, been like outwardly lied to.
And then the two others is acting irresponsibly, which could mean a lot of things.
Right.
And they also pass the blame on others. And then struggling with substance abuse. Like those are just signs. Those aren't like the only things you can witness, but those are like the 6 signs that you're dealing with a sociopath, which is manipulating others' emotions, repeatedly breaking the law, showing no remorse, repeatedly lying, acting irresponsibly, and potentially struggling with substance abuse. Sociopaths.
Huh? Who knew? That wasn't my definition of sociopath, to be honest with you.
Those aren't definitions. Those are just like.
Well, it wasn't my perception of a sociopath. I think for me, when I was thinking sociopath, it was more like somebody who's highly narcissistic.
Well, that could fall in a different category, like sociopaths. Yeah. Like a narcissist could still feel things, but they're not like so much. No, like a narcissist can feel something, but like a lot of it is like towards like, damn, am I a narcissist too? Shit. You know, like they feel it, especially when it's impacting self, right? So, but versus like if someone who's like struggling with substance abuse, like they're abusing themselves in the process, like they're not, you know?
Right.
So in the spirit of this being a show where you learn a lot about yourself through conversations with other people, give me 1 to 2 questions that you want answered by the next guest. Something that's been like puzzling you that you want to get somebody's opinion on.
What do you mean? Oh my God, you're so putting me on the spot right now. Who's the next guest?
Doesn't matter.
How do you know when it's time to break up with somebody?
Ooh.
When I want to even be more specific, like when nothing is particularly wrong.
Oh.
Meaning like, okay, they're not like cheating or they're not like lying or, you know, how do you know when a relationship has kind of had its course?
That's a good question, actually.
Okay,
Don't sell yourself short. That was a great question, especially with what you added on the end, because that's going to boggle some minds. Listen, I appreciate you being on this call. Give everybody a quick chance to know how to get in touch with you and what you got going on that can potentially help some people.
Okay, thanks. I am mostly on Instagram at redo.love. I'm also on TikTok at redo_love. And you can find me at www.redo.love online. I am running a course in a program called Finding the One. And just a spoiler alert, you are the one.
Narcissist.
So that course, that program helps people get from an insecure attachment style towards a secure attachment style. But really, it's an in-depth look, whether you're secure or insecure, into your subconscious and how to befriend it so that it's not controlling you. Rather, you are moving from a place of really knowing yourself.
All right. My name is Jeff Damisse. You can find me at j.damisse on IG and j_damisse for Twitter. For the podcast, it's Introspect_Club. That's everywhere. We're on YouTube, we're on Spotify, we're on IG, TikTok, you name it. And if you're an interesting person that you think you can add value to somebody's life, please reach out to me. I might be able to get you on the show. And if you have a question similar to like Flora or anybody else that just asked questions on this episode and you want us to answer the question, please DM me and we'll get to that. Flora, I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Until next time.